You'll have to impregnate us." The words cut through the heavy air of the cabin. Elliot froze. The three giant witches stood in the doorway, towering, their gazes deep and unblinking. The fading light of the setting sun bathed their faces, casting long shadows, making them look even more imposing. He didn't know what to think, let alone what to say. The weight of their words pressed down on him like a storm waiting to break. Never, in all his years as a hunter, had he imagined encountering something so strange. Africa, the place he'd chosen to escape his past, suddenly became a land full of mysteries he wasn't prepared to face. He'd come here to bury the memories of war, but it seemed destiny had no intention of letting him rest. His rifle lay beside him, untouched, his hand trembling, not from fear, but from uncertainty. What did they want? And why him? The tallest of the witches stepped forward. She wasn't just tall. She was colossal, a figure of power that made Elliot feel small, insignificant. Her presence was mesmerizing, but also terrifying. "You've been chosen, Hunter," she said, her voice low, full of ancient weight. "The earth already knows what you must do. There is no choice." Elliot blinked. He looked at the door as if he could escape. But what was stopping him? The earth around them, the savannah, seemed to be watching too. The wind that had been strong in free moments before was now still, waiting. "I don't understand," he whispered, the words swallowed by the gravity of the moment. "What does this mean?" The witch looked at him with a stern expression, as though dealing with a child. She didn't seem to care that he was confused. It was as though she'd expected him to ask that very question. "What does it mean?" she repeated, as if the answer were obvious. "You are the one to fulfill a destiny. The earth needs a new cycle, and you are the key." Elliot wanted more answers. He wanted to scream, run, do anything to stop this strange conversation. But deep down, he knew he had no power over what was happening. The witch's words held a force he couldn't comprehend, but could feel growing stronger by the second. He was being pulled into something much bigger than himself. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. The question on his mind wasn't what, but how. How could he accept what they were saying? How could he do something as absurd as this? He looked at each of the witches, one by one. The second one, shorter, smiled softly, looking at him with a kind of respect. The third, more distant, remained motionless, watching the scene without any visible emotion. She seemed the most enigmatic. Her eyes closed almost all the time, as if in contact with something beyond human sight. She was the quietest, but her presence felt like it commanded the entire situation. Elliot swallowed hard. He didn't want to ask the next question, but something inside him told him there was no avoiding it. "Why me?" he finally asked, his voice hoarse. "Why me? I'm nothing more than a lost hunter, a soul without direction." The shorter witch smiled, but it wasn't mocking. In fact, it was a smile of understanding, as though she could see through him to a depth he'd never realized. "You are not just a lost hunter," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You are the man who can find what he's lost. The earth knows this. The forces that move the world have chosen you for this moment." A chill ran down Elliot's spine. Her words, though spoken softly, carried the weight of an undeniable truth. But what had he lost? How could he be the key to something so immense? He had come here to forget the pain, to bury the scars the war had left on his body and soul. He didn't want to be a part of something this grand. The first witch, the tallest, leaned forward slightly, her eyes never leaving Elliot's. "The earth needs you, but you need it too," she said in a voice so soft that, for a moment, Elliot forgot to breathe. "That is your purpose. You are afraid of losing yourself again, aren't you?" Her words were more a statement than a question. "But what you don't see is that by helping us, you will find yourself." Elliot didn't know how to respond. What she said made sense of part of him, but another, more rational part screamed that this was madness. He had already lost so much in his life, his wife, his youth, his trust in the world, that the idea of giving himself up to something like this seemed like the final step into destruction. He feared losing the last part of himself that he still clung to. The witches didn't seem to expect an immediate response. They just stood there silent, as if they knew he needed time to process. Time, in fact, seemed to slow. The wind, which had been so alive, now stood completely still, as though the entire savannah was holding its breath. Elliot stood up slowly, his steps heavy on the wooden floor. He didn't know what to do, but he knew he had to do something. The fear of staying still, of not acting, was greater than any other fear he had ever felt. "What do I need to do?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The three witches exchanged glances. It was as if everything had already been decided, but they still needed his confirmation. "You will give us what we need. Hunter, it doesn't matter what you understand now, but when the time comes, you will know." Silence fell over the cabin again. Elliot, though still lost, felt a strange lightness in his chest. Something inside him was beginning to accept what was about to happen. Maybe the earth was right. Maybe he wasn't being called to be the man who ran away, but the man who would finally be found. The night fell fast, wrapping the cabin in shadows. Elliot lay on the rough wooden floor, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, but he wasn't seeing the cracks in the wood. His mind was racing, his thoughts tangled, unable to settle. The witches had left quietly, disappearing into the darkness as if they were never really there. He had expected them to stay, to explain more, to ease the growing unease in his chest. But they had gone, leaving him with nothing but the weight of their words. "You'll have to impregnate us." The phrase echoed in his mind, repeating like a haunting song he couldn't escape. He clenched his fists, trying to push it out, but the silence of the cabin only made the words grow louder. It wasn't just the strangeness of it that troubled him. It was the fact that somehow he felt like it was true, that the earth, the savannah, had chosen him for something. But why him? Why this? Elliot had come to Africa to forget, to leave behind the ashes of a war that had taken everything from him, his family, his peace, his faith. He had thought that in the endless stretch of the savannah, with its quiet winds and distant horizons, he might find some semblance of peace. Instead, he had found something far more dangerous, the promise of redemption through a task he couldn't possibly understand. His fingers traced the rifle beside him, its cold metal familiar, comforting. It had been his only companion for so long, the only thing he had ever trusted. But now, there was no trust to be found in his hands. No weapon could defend him from this, not from the weight of the earth itself pressing down on him. The door creaked open again, and Elliot shot up, instinctively reaching for his rifle. But it wasn't the witches who entered. It was an old man, a villager from the nearby settlement. He had been a quiet figure in Elliot's life, one of the few people who had ever spoken to him since he arrived. The old man's weathered face held no surprise, only understanding, as if he had been waiting for this moment. "Don't reach for that," the old man said softly, his voice low and measured. "That won't help you now." Elliot lowered the rifle, his muscles tense but his mind still clouded. He didn't know why, but something about the old man's presence brought a strange sense of calm. The villagers were a mystery to him, with their own customs and beliefs, but the old man had always seemed to see through him, past the facade of a hardened soldier. "You've met them, haven't you?" the old man asked, stepping further into the room, his eyes never leaving Elliot's. Elliot nodded. There was no point in lying. The old man already knew. "The witches," the man continued, sitting down across from him. "They chose you, didn't they, to carry out the task?" Elliot's throat tightened, and he looked away. The words didn't come easily, but the old man wasn't asking for a response. He simply waited, as if this conversation was inevitable, like the coming of the storm. "You think you're alone in this," the old man said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "But you're not. No one truly is. We are all part of something bigger than ourselves." Elliot's mind was a swirl of confusion. He had come here to escape the world, to break free of the endless wars that haunted him. And now, the earth had chosen him to be part of something bigger. But what did that even mean? What could he possibly do that would make any difference? "You don't understand yet, do you?" The old man's voice broke through his thoughts. "The earth calls to those who are lost, Elliot, the ones who are ready to change. You think you're here by accident? No, the earth doesn't make mistakes." Elliot met the old man's gaze, the weight of his words sinking in. This was no coincidence. It had never been a coincidence. Every step he had taken in the savannah, every moment of loneliness, every breath of the dry, hot air, it had all led him here. He didn't know if that made it easier to bear or harder. The burden was heavy, suffocating. The witches know what you are capable of, the old man continued. They know that you can bring change, not just to them, to the world. There are things in motion that you cannot yet see, but you will. Elliot shook his head. I don't even understand why they chose me. I'm just a man who's lost everything. The old man smiled, though it was a sad smile. That's why. You've lost everything, Elliot, and that makes you ready to gain what you never thought possible. Elliot stared at him, the silence growing thick between them. Was this man speaking of something he could never truly grasp? Redemption? Was that what this was about? You will have to trust them, the old man said finally, standing up slowly. And trust yourself. But remember, it's not about what you do. It's about why you do it. The old man turned to leave, his sandals making soft sounds against the wooden floor. The earth will be with you, he murmured as he stepped out into the night, whether you understand it or not. Elliot sat there for a long while, his mind still spinning with more questions and answers. The old man's words hung in the air, the truth of them almost too heavy to hold. The earth will be with you. He closed his eyes, letting the silence wash over him. Somehow, he knew that this was just the beginning. He could run, he could hide, but he could never escape what was coming. The witches had made it clear this was his path now, and there was no turning back. The morning came too quickly. The first rays of the sun pierced through the cracks in the cabin's walls, casting long, thin lines of light across the floor. Elliot hadn't slept, not really. His body had been there, stretched out on the floor, but his mind had wandered, torn between the weight of the witch's words and the old man's cryptic advice. There was something suffocating about it all. The quiet hum of the savannah outside seemed too loud, too oppressive. The wind had picked up again during the night, rustling the tall grasses that swayed in the distance, but it felt more like a warning than a comfort. Elliot sat up slowly, rubbing his face with his hands. The rifle was still beside him, a familiar weight, but now it seemed less like a tool for survival and more like an anchor, keeping him tethered to a past he was trying to escape. His eyes wandered to the door. He knew what was coming next, and he wasn't ready for it, not in the slightest. He stood up, feeling the stiffness in his limbs, and walked outside into the morning heat. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of dry earth and wild grasses. The savannah stretched out before him, endless, vast, a land that felt both foreign and familiar. There was a soft rustling behind him. Elliot turned, expecting to see the old man, but instead it was one of the witches, the tallest one, the one who had spoken the words that had shaken him to his core. Her presence was commanding. Her gaze locked on his, and for a moment, Elliot couldn't look away. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice low, yet filled with an undeniable power. Elliot swallowed hard, the weight of the question sinking deep into his chest. Ready? He wasn't ready for anything. Not for this. Not for whatever it was they expected of him. "No," he said quietly. "I don't think I'll ever be ready." The witch nodded slowly, as if she already knew the answer. She stepped closer, her massive frame looming over him. But there was no threat in her movement, only a quiet certainty. "The time is now," she said. "You have already made your choice by stepping into this land. The earth is called to you, and you cannot ignore it any longer." Elliot's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know what to say. How could he argue with something so absolute? He had come here to escape. But now, it seemed the escape was no longer possible. "You're not just a man lost in the world," the witch continued, her voice softening. "You're the bridge between two worlds, between the past and the future, between what was and what will be." Elliot felt a chill run down his spine. A bridge? Between worlds? It sounded like madness. But something about her words resonated deep within him, as though they were speaking to a part of him he hadn't yet discovered. "I don't understand," he admitted, his voice shaky. "I don't understand what you want from me. What am I supposed to do?" The witch was silent for a moment, her gaze never leaving him. Then she reached out and placed a hand gently on his shoulder. Despite her immense size, the touch was surprisingly tender. You don't have to understand everything, Elliot. Not yet, but you will. You have to trust that the earth knows what it's doing. Trust. It was a word that had been lost to him long ago. He hadn't trusted anyone since the war. Not his comrades, not even the woman he had once loved. And now this call from the earth, from these witches, demanded that he trust once more. Elliot closed his eyes for a moment, taking in a shaky breath. Trust. He had no choice. It was either trust or walk away, and walking away wasn't an option. Not anymore. Where do we start? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The witch's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. We start where you stand. Without another word, she turned and began walking toward the heart of the savannah. Elliot followed, his feet heavy, as if every step was a journey into the unknown. The path they walked was marked. There were no signs, no clear way forward. Just the endless stretch of the grasses, the distant trees, and the sky that seemed impossibly wide. Elliot felt small here, like a grain of sand on the edge of the world. As they walked, the witch spoke again, her voice carrying on the wind. The task is not simple, she said, and it is not easy. It is not something you can prepare for, but it is something you must face. We all must face it in time. Elliot frowned. What task? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stopped and turned to face him. Her eyes were full of something he couldn't quite read. You will know it when the time comes, she said simply. For now, your task is to listen. Listen to the land. Listen to the wind. It will tell you what you need to do. Elliot stood still for a moment, trying to grasp what she was saying. But the land, the wind, how could they tell him what to do? He was a man of action, not of listening. He didn't know how to wait, how to hear the whispers of the earth. But the witch's gaze was unwavering. She didn't look like she was going to explain further. Instead, she turned back toward Savannah and began walking again, her footsteps quiet and steady. Elliot followed her, unsure what he was supposed to hear or understand. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was beginning. Something was stirring inside him, just beneath the surface. He didn't know what it was, but it was there. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain, a rare, gentle rain in the dry savannah. Elliot inhaled deeply, his senses alive with the earth, with the air, with something he couldn't name. And then, for the briefest of moments, it felt like the land itself was breathing with him. The day wore on, but time felt fluid. The sun was high in the sky, casting sharp shadows that stretched across the golden grasses of the savannah. Elliot's legs were sore, his feet heavy, but he walked on, following the witch with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. They moved in silence, the only sounds being the occasional rustle of dry grass beneath their feet and the distant call of birds riding the wind. Elliot's thoughts wandered, not entirely sure what to make of all this. The task, the witches, the earth itself. How could he listen to the land? What could it possibly have to say to him? Do you hear it? The witch's voice broke the quiet, soft yet cutting through the air like a thread of lightning. Elliot stopped, his senses straining. The wind carried with it a subtle shift, a soft hum that was almost imperceptible, but it was there. Something was different about it, something that he couldn't quite explain. He had been so focused on the heavy weight of the task that he hadn't even thought to listen to the world around him. He shook his head. I don't hear anything. The witch's lips pressed together in a slight, knowing smile. She turned back toward the horizon, her long, dark hair blowing gently in the breeze. You will. In time, you will. The land speaks to those who know how to listen. She paused, her eyes scanning the savannah as though seeking something. It speaks in whispers, in the shift of the wind, in the way the sun touches the earth. The earth is alive, Elliot. It breathes. It feels. And it will guide you if you let it. Elliot frowned, still unsure what she meant. Alive? He had heard tales of the land being sacred, of spirits living in the earth. But all sounded like folklore to him. The scientist in him, the soldier in him, needed proof. He needed to see it to believe it. But as he stood there, looking out over the vast, undulating plains, something inside him shifted. A subtle stirring, as though the land was watching him, waiting, It was like a pull, a soft, unseen thread connecting him to the earth. For the first time, Elliot felt a deep connection to the land, something that went beyond survival or escape. This was something ancient, something deeper than he could comprehend. The witch spoke again, her voice gentle yet firm. You are here for a reason, and the earth has chosen you because you have the strength to listen. Elliot was about to ask what she meant when, suddenly, there was a loud rustle in the distance. He turned, his instincts kicking in, but the witch didn't seem surprised. She didn't even flinch. Stay calm, she said, her eyes narrowing. It's the start. Elliot felt his heart rate quicken. He couldn't tell if it was an animal or something else, but whatever it was approaching, fast. He moved instinctively toward his rifle, but the witch stopped with a hand on his arm. She didn't say anything. She simply held him there, watching the horizon. Then, out of the tall grasses, a figure emerged. It was a man, a young man, dressed in simple clothes that blended with the land. His face was painted with tribal markings, and his eyes gleamed with an intensity that matched the witch's own. He was moving quickly, almost as if he were running from something, but when he saw Elliot and the witch, he slowed down, coming to a halt before them. The witch did not speak immediately. She studied the young man, her expression unreadable. Elliot's grip tightened on the rifle, still unsure what was going on. The young man's eyes flicked toward Elliot, then back to the witch. He spoke, his voice a low rumble that seemed to echo the earth itself. The spirits are restless, he said, his gaze intense. The winds carry their voices. They have called him. It is time. Elliot's heart skipped a beat. Called him? Called him? He hadn't even understood what was happening, and yet the land seemed to have already decided for him. This strange, chaotic pull that he felt, this connection, it wasn't his imagination. It was real. The witch nodded slowly. Yes, it is time. The young man turned to Elliot, his gaze piercing, as though seeing straight through him. For a moment, Elliot thought he saw something ancient in those eyes, something older than time itself. You must follow, the young man said simply. Follow? Follow where? Elliot opened his mouth to ask, but the witch spoke first. Do not question, she said. You will understand soon enough. The task is upon you now. Elliot looked between the two of them, his mind spinning. He had wanted to run, to turn away from whatever this was, to leave and forget. But he couldn't. The land was pulling him in. The savannah itself was calling, and there was no escaping it. He hesitated for only a moment before following the young man as he turned and led them deeper into the wilderness. The witch followed silently, her presence as calm and powerful as the earth beneath their feet. The landscape began to change as they moved further into the savannah. The grasses thinned, replaced by rocky outcrops and scattered trees, their gnarled branches reaching toward the sky like twisted hands. The air grew warmer, and the distant hum of the wind seemed to carry with it the weight of unspoken things. The young man led them to a cliff overlooking a vast valley. At the bottom, Elliot could see a river winding to the land, its surface shimmering in the sunlight. The valley was unlike anything he had seen before, a place that seemed both peaceful and unsettling, as though something was waiting there, hidden beneath the surface. This is where it begins, the young man said, his voice echoing in the stillness. Elliot's stomach tightened. He didn't know what it was that had brought him here, or what was expected of him. But as he stood on the edge of the cliff, looking out over the land, he could feel the pull of something deeper, something ancient. The land was calling him, just as the witch had said, and he knew, for better or worse, that his journey had begun. The valley stretched out before them, an endless ribbon of water cutting through the savannah, winding its way between the jagged rocks and scattered trees. Elliot's eyes traced the river as it disappeared into the distance, feeling something deep stir within him. The valley felt alive, but not in the way he had imagined. It wasn't just nature, it wasn't just land. It felt like something older, something that had been waiting long, before he had even stepped foot in this place. He glanced at the witch, who had been standing beside him, unmoving, as the young man led them closer to the edge. Her gaze was unwavering, watching the scene below with a calm that unnerved Elliot. The young man turned to face them, his eyes never leaving Elliot's. "The time has come," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "The earth calls to you, but first you must prove yourself." Elliot's throat tightened. Prove himself? What did that even mean? He wasn't sure if he was ready for anything more. The way of his last few days, the strange encounters, the sense of destiny pressing down on him, all of it had been too much. Too many questions, too many forces at play. But standing at the edge of this valley, he knew there was no turning back. The young man's gaze held him firmly, unflinching. "We cannot show you the path. You must find it yourself." Elliot blinked, confused. "Find it myself?" he asked, the words tasting foreign in his mouth. "Yes," the young man said simply. "The earth will not reveal its secrets until you prove you are worthy of them. You must trust." Trust. That word again. Elliot's chest tightened. Trust had been broken too many times in his life. He had trusted people, his comrades in the war, the woman he had loved, only to lose them. Trust was not something he had to give freely anymore. Not after everything he'd been through. But the weight of the moment hung heavily over him. There was no denying it. Whatever was coming next, whatever challenge lay ahead, it wasn't a choice anymore. The earth had called, and he was here. He had already made his decision by stepping onto this land. The witch stepped forward, her eyes meeting his. "You must step into the river," she said, her voice low and firm. "Only then will you prove you're ready to move forward." Elliot's eyes widened. The river? It was swift, its waters rushing with an intensity he hadn't expected. It was deep, fast-moving, dangerous. Why would the earth require him to enter it? The young man, still watching Elliot with intensity, spoke again. "The river cleanses. It tests. Those who are not ready will drown in it. You must trust it, trust the earth, trust yourself." Elliot's heart pounded in his chest. He had been through battles, faced death many times. But this was different. This was not a fight he could win with skill or strength. This was a test of something deeper, something far more personal. He looked at the rushing river, its cold, wild waters churning beneath the sun. He could almost feel the pull, the pressure, the current calling him forward. "I'm not ready," Elliot said, his voice thick with uncertainty. "I don't know how to trust." The witch placed a hand on his arm. Her touch was gentle, but there was a strength in it that cut through his doubt. "You've already taken the first step by being here," she said softly. "Now you must let go. Let go of the fear that holds you back. The earth is not your enemy, Elliot. It will guide you if you let it." The young man nodded, his face serious. "Trust the land. It knows you better than you know yourself." Elliot stood there, looking down at the river. His mind was a tangle of fear and doubt. Every instinct in him screamed to pull back, to refuse the test. But the words of the witch and the young man echoed in his mind. Trust the land. The river would either claim him or would guide him. He had no choice but to find out which one it would be. Without a word, he took a tentative step forward, then another. His feet sank into the soft earth, his body tense. The closer he got to the river, the louder the rush of the water became, until it filled his ears, drowning out everything else. His heart raced as he approached the edge, the current moving so violently it almost seemed to reach out and pull him in. He hesitated. He wasn't sure if he was ready, if he could do this. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing on him, the fear of failure wrapping itself around his chest. But then, something inside him shifted. It wasn't a thought or a decision, but a feeling, a deep, visceral pull toward the water, as though the earth beneath his feet was calling to him, urging him forward. He took a breath and stepped into the river. The cold water surged up around his legs, shocking his body, sending a jolt of panic through him. He stumbled, his footing uncertain on the slippery rocks, but he forced himself to move forward. The water roared around him, pushing and pulling at his body, testing his balance, testing his will. Every part of him screamed to turn back, but he fought it, one step at a time, trusting that the land, the river, would not let him fall. With each step, the water rose higher, the current stronger, but Elliot pushed through. He fought his fear, not with strength, but with surrender. He had to let go, to trust the land beneath him, to trust that it would hold him. As he moved deeper into the river, The roar of the waters seemed to soften. The pull of the current lessened, and for a brief moment, everything felt still. His body was drenched, the cold water seeping into his clothes. But he felt something else, something warm, something alive, surrounding him, lifting him up. He was no longer fighting the river. He was with it. The moment he reached the center of the river, the waters calmed entirely, as though the earth itself had accepted him. He stood there, chest heaving, his heart pounding in his ears. The river, the land, had tested him, and he had passed. He looked back toward the witch and the young man, who stood on the bank, watching him with expressions of quiet approval. "You have done it," the witch said, her voice soft. "You have trusted the land, and it has shown you its strength." Elliot nodded slowly, still catching his breath. He had stepped into the river, not knowing if he would be swallowed whole or carried to safety. And yet, here he was, standing in the center of it, stronger than he had ever felt before. He had taken the first step toward understanding, toward the truth of the earth, of the savannah, and he knew now that there was no turning back. He had trusted, and the earth had answered. The river had released its grip, and Elliot stood in the calm waters, his body drenched but his mind clearer than it had been in days. The coldness of the river was no longer a shock. It felt like a baptism, washing away the doubts, the fears, the confusion that had clouded his thoughts since he first arrived. He was no longer just a man who ran from his past. He was becoming someone else, someone the land needed him to be. As he made his way back to the shore, the witch and the young man stepped forward, their eyes fixed onto a quiet understanding. No words were needed. They could see the change in him. The transformation was subtle, but it was there. The witch, the one who had been with him from the beginning, smiled faintly. It wasn't a smile of triumph, but of recognition, as if she had known this would happen all along. "You have passed the first test," she said softly, her voice carrying over the stillness of the river. "The land does not give its strength freely. It must be earned, piece by piece. The river tested your willingness to surrender, and you did. You let go of control, and in doing so, you found your power." Elliot stood on the bank, the water dripping from his clothes, his heart still racing. He didn't feel the same as he had before. The weight in his chest, the constant ache of being lost, had lessened. The land had shown him something. It had tested him, but it had also taught him. "What comes next?" he asked, his voice steady despite the storm still swirling within him. The question had become inevitable, though he knew the answer wasn't simple. It was never going to be simple. The young man spoke this time, his eyes sharp and bright. "Next, you will follow the path the land has laid out for you. It will not be easy. There will be more tests, more trials." The river was only the beginning. Elliot's pulse quickened. More trials? How many could there be? What more could the earth possibly ask of him? He had already stepped into the river, already faced his own fear, his doubt. What else was there? But the young man continued, as if reading his thoughts. "Each test will bring you closer to the truth. You will learn about yourself, about the earth, and about the way the world connects. You are not just a man on a journey. You are a bridge between worlds, a link between the past and the future." The witch added, "You were chosen because you are ready to face what others cannot. And in doing so, you will guide others too. But first, you must understand the depth of the earth's power. You must trust it, and in doing so, trust yourself." Elliot's chest tightened again. He had trusted the river, but now he wondered if he was truly ready for what was coming. He had barely begun to understand the land, barely scratched the surface of whatever it was that the witch and the young man spoke of. But it was clear there was no going back now. This was the path he had chosen, the path that the earth had chosen for him. "I'm ready," he said, though he wasn't sure if he meant it. He had to say it, had to believe it, or else he might drown in the uncertainty that still gripped him. The young man nodded, his expression unreadable. "Follow us. The next test is near." Without another word, they began to walk again, leading Elliot into the heart of the savannah. The landscape here was different. The earth was cracked, the grasses sparse, the trees twisted in shapes that felt more alive than they should have been. There was a tension in the air, a heaviness that hung over the land like a veil. The witch walked beside him now, her gaze steady. Elliot could feel the weight of her presence, the depth of her knowledge. She was not just a guide. She was a teacher, a keeper of secrets he wasn't yet ready to hear. They walked for what felt like hours, the sun dipping lower in the sky, the shadows growing longer. The air grew warmer, and the smells of savannah became sharper, more distinct. He could smell the rich earth beneath his feet, the subtle scent of grasses, and something else, something wild, untamed. Elliot's mind wandered as they walked. He thought about the woman he had loved, the life he had lost, the war that had changed him. He thought about the soldiers who had fallen beside him, the promises that had been broken, the family he would never see again. And yet, despite the ache in his chest, he felt something else stir within him. The earth was calling him, yes, but so was something deeper, something that had always been there, buried beneath the pain, a yearning to belong, a need to understand. You feel it, don't you? The witch's voice broke through his thoughts. Elliot nodded, his throat tight. I feel something. It's like the land is alive, speaking to me, but I don't understand it. The witch's smile was subtle, but it held the weight of centuries behind it. You will understand. In time, they came to a clearing, and Elliot's breath caught in his chest. In the center of the clearing was a large stone circle, worn smooth by time. The stones were arranged in a perfect circle, each one taller than a man, their surfaces etched with symbols and markings Elliot didn't recognize. This is the place, the young man said, his voice echoing in the stillness. The next test begins here. Elliot stepped forward, drawn to the stones, feeling an inexplicable pull. As he walked closer, the air seemed to thicken, the earth beneath him humming with a low vibration. The markings on the stones seemed to glow faintly, their symbols shifting as if alive. You must stand in the center, the witch instructed, and listen. Listen? Elliot asked, his voice hoarse. The young man nodded. The earth will speak to you here, but you must be still, quiet. Elliot swallowed hard. This was it, the next test. He stepped into the center of the circle, his heart pounding in his chest. The moment he did, the world seemed to shift. The wind picked up, swirling around him, and the stones seemed to hum with energy. And then, in the silence that followed, the earth spoke. The air in the circle grew heavier, thicker, as if the very atmosphere was charged with something ancient. Elliot stood in the center of the stone circle, his heart racing, his mind spinning. The sounds of the savannah, once distant, faded away. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed them whole, leaving only a profound silence. The wind whistled through the clearing, but it wasn't the usual wind. It felt different. It had a rhythm, a pulse, like it was breathing, like it was alive. The vibration from the stones beneath his feet thrummed through his body, vibrating deep into his bones. Every part of him seemed to hum in response to the energy around him. And then there was a voice, soft at first, like a whisper on the edge of his consciousness, but it grew stronger with each passing second. You have come. You have listened. Elliot's breath hitched in his throat. The voice was not human, not animal. It was the earth itself, speaking to him, as if the very land had come alive to answer his doubts. The words were not spoken aloud, but in his mind, their power and clarity were undeniable. He looked around, but the witch and the young man remained silent, still standing outside the circle. They were watching him, but they did not interfere. This was his moment. You are not alone. You never were. Elliot swallowed hard, trying to make sense of what he was hearing. The voice of the earth was ancient, eternal, and yet it was speaking directly to him. It knew him, knew everything about him. The voice seemed to pause, as if considering something, and then it came again, deeper this time, resonating in the pit of his stomach. You have walked through fire, through the river. You have faced yourself in its depths. But now you must face the land. Elliot's legs felt weak. He had done so much already, faced the pain of his past, of loss, of his own fear. But now this felt different. His whole body trembled as the earth's voice washed over him, filling his mind with sensations, memories, emotions he couldn't quite grasp. The earth is your ally, but you must learn to trust it completely. He clenched his fists at his sides, trying to stay steady. His breath came in ragged gasps. What was the earth asking of him? What could he possibly offer to it in return? Suddenly, the earth beneath his feet shifted. It was subtle at first, just a slight movement like a tremor, but then it became more pronounced. The stones around him seemed to pulse, their markings glowing brighter with each passing moment. The wind picked up, howling around the edges of the stone circle. Elliot closed his eyes, trying to center himself, but it was impossible. The energy was too overwhelming. Then came a series of flashes, images, emotions, fragments of memories that weren't his own. He saw fields of flowers blooming under the sun, animals running through the savannah, the skies shifting with the seasons. He saw the faces of people, faces he didn't recognize, their lives intertwined with the land, their existence part of a larger, timeless rhythm. And with each image, he felt it. The earth's heartbeat, the deep connection between all living things. You are part of this cycle, the voice said, now echoing within him, vibrating through every fiber of his being. And it is part of you. You have forgotten your place in it, but it has never forgotten you. Elliot's chest tightened as the images continued. He saw himself not as he was now, but as part of something greater. He saw his ancestors, the long line of humanity that had walked the earth before him. He saw their struggles, their victories, their quiet moments of peace, and their deep connection to the land. For the first time in his life, he understood he was not separate from the world. He was part of it. His pain, his loss, his search for meaning, they were not just his own. They were echoes of something much larger, something that spanned generations and continents. The earth had always been a part of him, and he had always been a part of it. The voice softened, becoming a soothing hum. You have faced your past. Now, you must embrace your future. Elliot's legs buckled beneath him, and he fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the weight of it all. Tears stung his eyes, but he didn't try to wipe them away. They were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of understanding, of a deep, unshakable connection to the earth, to the world around him, to the land he had come to protect. He felt something else too, a warmth, a lightness spreading through his chest. It was like a flame, small at first, but growing, filling him with a sense of purpose he had never known. You are ready. The voice faded slowly, leaving behind a profound silence. Elliot stayed kneeling for a moment, his hands pressed to the earth, feeling its warmth, its life beneath him. He breathed deeply, the air filling his lungs with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. When he finally stood, the witch and the young man were standing just outside the stone circle, watching with expressions of quiet approval. The witch gave him a nod, as if acknowledging that the journey had truly begun. You have heard the earth, the witch said, her voice steady. And now, you are ready to listen to what it asks of you. Elliot took a deep breath, his heart still racing but filled with a strange peace. The land had shown him its strength, had revealed its deep, eternal wisdom. He understood now. The earth was not a thing to be feared. It was a partner, a guide, a reflection of his own soul. And with that understanding, something shifted within him. He wasn't just a man lost in the savannah anymore. He was a part of something greater, something that spanned across time and space. The next test would come soon enough. But for now, he was ready. The stillness of the land pressed down on Elliot like a weight he couldn't shake. The wind had stopped completely, the air thick with silence, and yet his heart hammered in his chest. He stood in the center of the stone circle, where everything had come to a head. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something to break. He'd been through so much already. The river, the earth's voice, the intense lessons about pain, loss, and trust. He had come to Africa looking for escape, but all the savannah had given him was confrontation. With himself, with the past, with the man he thought he was. The witch and the young man stood silently on the edge of clearing. They weren't moving, but their eyes were on him, watching, waiting. The path ahead was clear, but he had no idea how to step forward. He was still trapped in the aftershocks of everything he'd learned. The earth had shown him more than he'd asked for. But was he ready for the weight of it all? What now? The words came out of his mouth without him thinking. It was a question that had been there since he first stepped into Savannah. He had been questioning his life, his choices, every step he took. But now the real question was here. The witch finally spoke, her voice like the hum of the earth beneath him. Now you must choose, Elliot. The land has given you the strength. The truth has been laid bare before you. But what you do with it is yours to decide. Elliot swallowed hard. The truth, he'd seen it. He'd felt it. The pain, the guilt, the anger. It was all there buried deep inside him. But so was a possibility for change. He could feel it in his bones. The earth had given him something powerful, something raw. It was the same power that ran to the veins of every tree, every river, every creature in the savannah. It was a part of him now, but he had to decide what he was going to do with it. His hand clenched into a fist at his side. The choice was his. He could walk away, leave the earth's teachings behind, and go back to the life of a man running from everything. Or he could embrace it. He could face the truth, face the scars he tried so hard to hide, and step into the unknown. He looked at the young man, who had remained silent, his eyes serious, unwavering. The man didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The weight of the decision hung between them. Elliot knew what he had to do. The witch stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. The earth doesn't force you to choose. It only shows you the way. The path has been laid before you, but you are the one who must walk it. Elliot nodded, his throat tight. He had tried to escape before, tried to run from the pain, the loss, the guilt. But now he understood. The earth had shown him that running was never going to fix anything. Hiding only buried the truth deeper. It was time to confront what was inside him, and in doing so, face the future. There was no more avoiding it. He took a deep breath. I choose to face it. His voice was steady, stronger than it had ever been. The words weren't just a promise to the witch or the young man. They were a promise to himself. He would no longer run. He would stand and fight, for himself, for the earth, for the future that still lay ahead of him. The witch nodded slowly, her expression softening, though her eyes were still full of that ancient wisdom. Good. Her voice was quiet, but there was a weight behind it. She had known all along that this was where Elliot needed to be. She hadn't been waiting for a decision from him. She had been waiting for him to make it himself. The young man stepped forward now, his presence commanding, but not threatening. You have been chosen, he said, his voice carrying the authority of the earth itself. Now, you must make the choice to live with what you know, what you've learned. Elliot's breath hitched in his chest. It was a lot to carry. The weight of the earth's truths was heavy, crushing even, but it wasn't a burden he had to carry alone. Not anymore. The earth will be your guide, the young man continued. But you must learn to listen. It will always be with you. It will always show you the way, but you must open yourself to it. You are no longer just a man. You are part of this world now. The weight of his words hit Elliot like a slap to the face. He was no longer just a man. He was something more. He was connected to the land, to the very fabric of the earth. He felt it now deep inside. This land, the savannah, it wasn't just a place. It was a part of him. He nodded slowly, the weight of everything settling into his bones. I understand, he said, his voice still steady, though a tremor of something deeper ran through him. He wasn't the same man who had arrived here, broken and lost. He had been remade by the earth, by the trials, by the truths that had been laid bare before him. He was ready to walk this path. There was no turning back. The witch stepped back, her eyes full of approval, but still distant, as if watching him from the edge of something ancient. The path ahead is yours to walk. The earth will guide you, but it will not walk for you. You must make the journey yourself. Elliot took a deep breath. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in years, he was ready to face it. He could feel the earth beneath his feet, the rhythm of the land, the pulse of the earth. It was all connected, and he was a part of it now. He turned and looked at the horizon, with a savannah stretched out before him, endless and untamed. He had found his place in it, and now he was ready to take the next step. And with that, Elliot began to walk. The sun was low on the horizon, casting long, sharp shadows across the endless savannah. Elliot walked, each step a little more assured than the last. The weight of the earth's power was still with him, heavy in his chest, but it no longer felt like a burden. It felt like part of him, a constant reminder that he was no longer running. Behind him, The witch and the young man had faded into background, their figures mere silhouettes in the distance. They had given him his space, as if knowing that this next part of the journey was his alone. The land had tested him. The earth had spoken to him. Now, it was time for him to prove that he had learned something from it all. He didn't know where he was headed. He hadn't been told. All he knew was that he couldn't stop now. The journey was never going to be easy, but it was the only way forward. Every choice he had made had brought him here, and there was no turning back. As he walked deeper into the savannah, he began to notice the subtle changes in the land around him. The grass, once dry and brittle, now seemed to sway with more life, as if the earth was responding to his newfound understanding. The sky above was a canvas of oranges and pinks, the setting sun painting the world in fiery hues. Elliot stopped for a moment, taking it all in. He could feel the pulse of the land beneath his feet, the steady thrum that matched the beat of his heart. The land was alive. He was a part of it, and it was a part of him. There was no more separation. The divide between man and earth had been shattered. But with that unity came a new kind of responsibility. The land had given him a gift, a power, but now he had to use it wisely. The earth wasn't a tool to be wielded. It wasn't some resource to be controlled. It was a force to be understood, a living, breathing entity that could give and take in equal measure. "You must listen, Elliot," the witch's voice echoed in his mind. "The land speaks in whispers, but it is up to you to hear it." Elliot's chest tightened, the weight of her words settling heavily on him. He had no illusions about the path ahead. It was going to be hard. He would be tested again and again. But this time he was ready. The earth had made him ready, and he wasn't going to let it down. As the evening deepened, a new sound filled the air, the call of a distant animal, low and haunting, reaching across the vastness of savannah. Elliot paused, listening closely. It wasn't the sound of any animal he had heard before. This was something different, something old. It was the land speaking, calling to him, urging him forward. He didn't know why, but he followed the sound. His feet carried him through the tall grasses, each step pushing him closer to something. He didn't know what, but he could feel it in his gut. Something was waiting for him. The earth had drawn him here, and it was going to show him what came next. The further he walked, the thicker the air became, heavier with the scent of earth and wild herbs. The land was dense now, the grasses growing taller, the trees more closely packed. The sounds of the animals seemed to grow louder, more urgent, as if they too knew something was coming. Then, in the distance, he saw it, a great rock formation jutting from the earth like a sentinel. It stood at the center of a small clearing, surrounded by trees whose leaves shimmered under the twilight. Elliot felt a pull toward it, a magnetic force drawing him in. When he reached the formation, he stopped. His heart began to race. It was beautiful, but it felt wrong. The energy here was thick, almost oppressive, like the land was holding its breath. The air was heavy, thick with something he couldn't quite place. It was as though the land was waiting for him to make the next move, as though it was testing him again. At the base of the formation, there was a small pool of water. The reflection of the setting sun shone off its surface, giving an ethereal glow. Elliot approached the pool slowly, his feet crunching the dry earth beneath him. He kneeled beside the water, staring at his reflection. For a moment, he didn't recognize himself. The man in the water was someone different. His eyes were harder, sharper, filled with a kind of quiet strength he hadn't seen before. The scars of his past, the mistakes, the pain, he could still feel them, still see them, but they no longer defined him. "You are not who you were," the witch's voice whispered again, her words a lingering presence in his mind. Elliot reached out and touched the water. The moment his fingers broke the surface, the water rippled and the reflection of the sky distorted. For a split second, the image of a woman appeared in the ripples. Her face blurred, but there was something familiar about her. The brief vision startled him, and he pulled his hand back. The ripples faded quickly, and the reflection returned to normal. He looked around, his pulse quickening. Had it been real, or just a trick of the mind, the land playing games with him? He didn't know. But the image of that woman lingered in his mind, a ghost he couldn't shake. "The land shows what it must," the witch's voice returned, more distant now. but it is up to you to find what it means. Elliot stood up slowly, wiping his hand on his pants. He didn't have the answers, but he knew now that the earth wasn't going to give him everything. He would have to fight for the answers, for the truth. It was his to discover, his to uncover. The path ahead was long, but for the first time in his life, he felt like he could face it. The last of the light faded from the sky, leaving only the faintest trace of twilight. The land around him seemed to hold its breath once again, but Elliot was no longer afraid. He had embraced his place in the world. He had faced the truth, and now he could walk forward, knowing that whatever came next, he was ready. He turned away from the pool and began walking, the savannah stretching out before him, vast and untamed. And for the first time, he walked without fear, without regret. He wasn't running anymore. The earth had chosen him, and now he was ready to make his mark. The savannah stretched out before Elliot, vast and untamed. It was both terrifying and beautiful, a land full of life and death, of creation and destruction, all existing in a delicate balance. The land had tested him, forced him to confront his past, and now, as the sky above him turned dark, it felt like everything had led to this moment. He had already faced the river, the earth, and the voice of the land itself. He had learned to trust the earth, to listen to its whispers, to find his place in it. But there was one final test, one last thing he had to confront. He didn't know what it would be, but he felt it in his gut. Something was coming. As he walked deeper into the savannah, the familiar sense of calm from earlier began to dissipate. The air grew heavy again, thick with tension. The night was closing in, and the sound of the animals had grown more frantic, more urgent. The earth was restless. He felt the pull again. It wasn't a sound or a voice this time. It was a feeling, a sensation, something inside him telling him that he was close. He followed it, trusting the instinct the earth had awakened in him. In the distance, he saw it, a figure, standing alone beneath the shadow of an ancient tree. The silhouette was impossible to miss. The woman from the vision. His heart skipped a beat, and he quickened his pace, the weight of everything crashing down on him. Was it her? The one he had lost? Or was it something else? When he reached her, he stopped a few paces away, unable to speak. She stood there, her face turned slightly away from him, as though waiting for him to take the next step. He opened his mouth, but no words came. His heart raced. The woman turned slowly, revealing her face. It wasn't her, not in the way he had hoped. It wasn't the face of the woman he had loved, but it was her. The earth had shown him her face in the ripples of the water, and now it had come full circle. "You are ready," she said softly, her voice like the wind in the trees. Elliot felt his knees weaken. He didn't know if he could bear it, but her presence, calm and unwavering, steadied him. "Ready for what?" he asked, his voice trembling, raw with emotion. "To face the one thing that has kept you from moving forward," she replied, stepping closer. "To face yourself." Elliot swallowed hard. The weight of her words hit him like a physical blow. He had already faced so much, but this was different. This wasn't about the earth or the land or the trials it had put him through. This was about him, about what he had never been able to let go of. "I've faced everything," he said, his voice strained. "I've seen it all. What more is there to face?" The woman didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached out and placed a hand on his chest, right over his heart. Elliot felt the warmth of her touch, the connection between them, deeper than anything he had ever known. "You've faced the world, Elliot, but you've never faced what's inside you." The words hit him like a punch. He had spent so long running from the pain, from the guilt, from the ghosts of his past, that he had never truly faced them. He had hidden behind the land, behind the earth's trials, because they were easier to deal with than the truth inside him, the truth that had always haunted him. The earth had given him the power to change, to heal, but that healing could only happen if he faced the parts of himself he had been trying to bury. For the first time, Elliot understood. This wasn't about survival. It wasn't about escaping. It was about redemption, true redemption, and it started here, with him. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The pain, the loss, the anger, it was all still there. But now he could see it clearly. Now he could begin to understand it. He wasn't running anymore. He wasn't going to let his past control him. The woman smiled, her expression one of quiet approval. "You've already taken the hardest step," she said. "You faced the land, the truth. Now face yourself. And then the world will open to you." The sky above them was filled with stars now, the first glimmers of light piercing the vast dark. The savanna around him seemed to come alive, the earth beneath his feet humming with energy. The land had given him everything he needed. The earth had shown him his strength, his power, his place in the world. And now he knew what he had to do. He took one last look at the woman, his heart steady now. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice filled with a quiet, lasting peace. As the woman faded into the night, her figure dissolving into the landscape, Elliot stood alone under the vast, endless sky. The journey was far from over, but he was ready for whatever came next. He was no longer lost, and the earth, his guide, would always be with him.